Elena had exactly $43 in her checking account when she got the call from the hospital. Her mother had been admitted the night before, chest pains, possible cardiac episode, and now a surgery that would cost more than Elena made in 3 years working double shifts at the diner. She stood in the break room holding her phone, still in her uniform, still smelling like coffee and fried eggs, and she didn't cry because she had already used up that option somewhere around the 6th consecutive month of late rent notices. She was 24 years old and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The offer came through a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Millionaire who worked as a personal assistant and moved through a different world entirely, a world of polished lobbies and catered lunches and men who signed things without reading them. Millionaire had always looked at Elena the way people look at something they feel slightly guilty throwing away. She called on a Tuesday and said it carefully, like she was handling something fragile. "He's not looking for love," Millionaire said. "He's very clear about that. He's 73, he's in excellent health, and he needs a wife for legal reasons, estate, inheritance, family optics." His words. There would be a prenuptial agreement. There would also be a very significant sum paid upfront and a monthly arrangement. Elena listened to the number. She asked Millionaire to repeat it. Then she said yes. His name was Arthur Whitfield. She looked him up before they met. Old money, older reputation, the kind of man who appeared in the background of photographs at charity galas, never in the foreground. He had been married once before, 40 years ago, to a woman named Catherine who had died of cancer in 1987. There were no children. His company, a private investment firm with a name that told you nothing, had made him the kind of wealthy that stopped being countable at some point and became more like a weather system, something you simply lived inside of. They met for lunch at a restaurant where nobody gave her menu a price. He was tall, white-haired, with a kind of face that had once been very handsome and had settled into something quieter, dignified, watchful, slightly removed. He stood when she walked in, which she hadn't expected. He asked her what she'd like to drink and actually waited for her answer instead of ordering for her. "I want to be honest with you," he said, after they'd been sitting for 20 minutes. "I'm not going to pretend this is conventional, but I want you to know that if you agree to this arrangement, you will be treated with complete respect. I have no interest in making your life difficult." She studied him across the white tablecloth. "Why me specifically?" "Millionaire said you were trustworthy," he said. "In my experience, that's rarer than most people admit." She signed the papers 2 weeks later. Her mother's surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. The bill was paid in full on Friday. The wedding was small, a judge, 2 witnesses, a room in a building downtown that smelled like old paper and floor wax. She wore a blue dress she'd bought at a consignment shop because she didn't want him to spend money on something that didn't feel real. He wore a dark suit and a tie the color of slate. There were no flowers. Nobody cried. Afterward, he took her to the house, his house, which would now technically be her house too, and showed her to a bedroom that was larger than her entire former apartment. "You can change anything you'd like," he said, standing in the doorway. "I want you to be comfortable." She stood in the middle of the room looking at the bed, the curtains, the view of the garden below, and she thought, "I have made a transaction. I have been practical. This is what practical looks like." She told herself that every night for the first week. They had a system, of a sort. Breakfast was at 7:30. She learned this on the first morning when she came downstairs to find him already seated, coffee poured, newspaper folded beside his plate. He gestured to the chair across from him without looking up. Not rudely. Just with the ease of someone who assumed the world would arrange itself in the way it should. Saturday. She drank the coffee. It was extraordinary coffee. "Do you always read the paper?" she asked. "I like the way of it," he said. "Screens feel temporary." She thought about that. She didn't say anything. They were mostly quiet in those first days, but it wasn't the hostile kind of quiet. It was more like 2 people in the same waiting room, unsure what they were waiting for. He worked in his study most of the day. She explored the house slowly, room by room, the way you might explore an old country you'd heard about but never visited. There was a library with 2 rolling ladders and more books than she could count. There was a kitchen garden outside the back door with things growing in careful rows. There was a hallway on the 3rd floor lined with photographs she studied for longer than she'd planned. His wife Catherine at 20, at 30, in a garden, at a table, laughing at something out of frame. He was kind. That was the thing she kept returning to, kept examining from different angles. Not performatively kind. Not kind the way people are kind when they want something. He was kind the way some people are simply built, quietly, without announcement, as though decency was just the floor he stood on and not something he needed credit for. On Wednesday, he left a book outside her bedroom door. No note. Just a novel she had mentioned once, briefly, in passing. She'd said something about never having gotten around to reading it. She stood in the hallway holding it and felt something she couldn't name. On Thursday, she found him in the kitchen at midnight, making tea. She couldn't sleep either. He asked if she wanted a cup and she said yes, and they sat at the kitchen table for an hour talking about nothing important. Where she grew up, what the diner was like, whether she believed that people were fundamentally good or fundamentally something else. He had opinions, careful ones, offered without force. He listened when she spoke. On Saturday morning he showed her the garden. He knew the name of everything. He said her name when he pointed something out. This one blooms in April. Elena, look at where it's just starting. And it was the first time in days that hearing her own name hadn't felt like paperwork. That evening she was setting the table for dinner when she knocked his mail off the counter and it scattered across the floor. She crouched to gather it and saw the corner of a folder that had slid partly open. Not a letter, not a bill. A medical document. She wasn't trying to read it. She wasn't. But 3 words caught before she could look away. She put the folder back exactly as she'd found it. She finished setting the table. She smiled when he came in from the study and asked how her afternoon had been. But her hands were not entirely steady as she poured the water. And when they sat down across from each other in the warm lamplight of that house she had not yet decided how to feel about, she looked at him, really looked, maybe for the first time, and thought about how little she actually knew, and how much she was beginning, without permission, to want to. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the large bed in the large room and stared at the ceiling and thought about those 3 words on the medical document. She hadn't read the whole thing. She told herself that, kept telling herself that, but 3 words were enough. 3 words had a way of rearranging everything around them, the way a single crack in a wall suddenly made you notice the whole structure differently. She got up at 5 and went to the kitchen and made coffee badly, because she still hadn't fully learned his machine, and she stood at the window watching the garden go from black to grey to green as the sun came up, and she thought about what it meant to feel afraid for someone you had known for 9 days. He came downstairs at 7:15, earlier than usual. He was already dressed, which surprised her. He stopped when he saw her standing there. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He looked at her for a moment in that careful way he had, like he was reading something slightly below the surface. Then he moved to the cabinet and took down a second mug without asking. "The garden's best in the early morning," he said, "before the light gets too direct. If you ever can't sleep, that's the best place for it." She wrapped both hands around her coffee. "Arthur." He paused. "Are you sick?" The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, something moved in the hedgerow. A bird, probably. She watched his face, the way it shifted through something small and internal before settling. "You saw the folder," he said. Not accusing. Just stating. "It fell. I wasn't reading it. I only saw. I didn't read the whole thing." He nodded slowly. He sat down at the table, and for the first time since she'd moved in, he looked his age. Not diminished. Nothing about him was ever diminished, but present in it, carrying it visibly. "It's my heart," he said. "I've known about the condition for 2 years. It's manageable. That's not me being optimistic. The cardiologist is actually quite boring about how manageable it is. But it does require attention, medication, occasional monitoring. And at my age, with the estate in the situation it's in, my attorney felt that he paused, chose the word carefully, single status was creating unnecessary legal complications." Elena set her mug down. "So the marriage," she said, "was practical," he said. "Yes. On my end as well." He looked at her directly. "I told you that from the beginning. I want to make sure you understood I wasn't. I'm not in the habit of deceiving people. Especially not people who are trusting me." She thought about that for a long time. Long enough that the coffee went lukewarm. "How bad could it get?" she asked. "It won't kill me next week, if that's what you're asking." "That's not a real answer." Something moved in his expression, something that might have been the beginning of a smile, small and involuntary. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at the table. "The honest answer is that I don't know. The condition is stable now. It may stay that way for years. Or it may not. That's the nature of it." She nodded. She picked up her mug again and drank the cold coffee without making a face. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I just wanted to know." He studied her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between gratitude and discomfort, like a man who had been offered something he wasn't sure he deserved. Then he nodded once, and reached across the table and briefly pressed his hand over hers, and then stood up and said he had calls to make before 9 and left the kitchen, and Elena sat alone with the birds in the hedgerow and felt the warmth where his hand had been. Things shifted after that, but slowly, the way seasons shift, not in a single moment but in the accumulated weight of small things. She noticed more. He noticed more. The careful politeness between them began to have something underneath it, something with a little more warmth in the architecture. He started showing her things about the house, not the rooms she'd already found, but the history of them. One afternoon he pulled a box from the back of the library closet and spread old photographs across the reading table. The house in 1932, bare and formal. His parents on the front steps, stiff and young. Catherine in the garden, laughing with her head back, in a summer dress, completely unself-conscious. "She would have liked you," he said, looking at the photograph. She had no patience for pretense either. Elena looked at the woman in the photo. "You must miss her enormously." "Every day," he said simply. "But it stopped being painful somewhere around the 15th year. Now it's just part of how I'm built." He glanced at her. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," she said. And she meant it. She started spending time in the garden. He'd given her a brief tutorial. "This one is temperamental. This one needs more water than you'd think. Don't trust how dead this one looks in the cold." And she found herself going out each morning with her second cup of coffee, moving along the rows, paying attention to things. It was the first time in years that she'd had something to tend that wasn't a crisis. One afternoon she came inside muddy to the elbows and ran directly into Arthur in the hallway, who looked at her hands and then at her face and said, entirely seriously, "You've been fighting with a rosebush." "It started it," she said. He laughed. A real one, not polite, not restrained. A laugh that came from somewhere genuine, and she stood in the hallway watching it happen and felt something warm and inconvenient move through her chest. She called her mother that Sunday. Her mother was recovering well, moving slowly but stubbornly around her apartment, refusing the home nurse they'd hired because she didn't like having strangers touch her things. She asked about Arthur the way she asked about everything, with directness and no particular ceremony. "Is he good to you?" Elena looked across the room at the garden through the window. "Yes." "But." "No but." "Elena." "His." She stopped. "Try it again." "It's complicated, Mom." Complicated like difficult, or complicated like something you didn't expect? She didn't answer right away. Her mother, who had known her for 24 years and had learned to read the shape of her silences, said nothing either. "Both," Elena said finally. "I think both." She was helping him sort through some correspondence one evening. He'd asked if she minded. He had too many letters and not enough patience for them, and she'd said she didn't mind because she genuinely didn't, when she found the envelope at the bottom of the pile. Her name on the front. Not typed. His handwriting, which was precise and slightly old-fashioned, the kind of handwriting that had been taught rather than developed. She looked up. He was at his desk, reading something, his glasses low on his nose. "What is this?" He glanced over. "Open it." Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, the name of his attorney's office. Below that, dense legal language that she read slowly, twice, before she understood what she was actually holding. He had amended the terms of the arrangement. Significantly. In her favor. Not just the monthly sum, the house, a portion of the estate, protections she hadn't asked for and hadn't known to ask for. "Arthur." "You stayed," he said simply, still looking at his papers. "When you found out about my heart, you stayed. That means something." He paused. "It means quite a lot, actually." She held the paper in her hands and looked at this man, this strange, private, decent man she had married for money and was now watching with something she didn't have a safe word for yet, and she felt the careful wall she'd built between practical and real begin to develop, without her permission, a significant crack.